I want to invite our 4 team leaders, the facilitators or rapporteurs or their representatives. Richard had to leave to get home. He promised to be home by bedtime for once. Dima, I think you're going to represent Richard. Shane, you're here. What happened to Marjan? Marjan's coming forward too. And Rick. While we're getting sorted here, 100 years ago on this site was the old City and Guilds Institute, part of which became the engineering buildings or engineering divisions of Imperial College somewhat later. And I can't help wondering whether there was a meeting of this kind on this site, not in this building, in the age of the peak of the age of railways, in which a bunch of lunatic technologists showed up and started talking about these motor car things, and how there would be a need to provide parking spaces and petrol distribution points and repair shops. And the population might well then have been horrified at this notion that something might replace the tube system, which is pretty well developed by that time, and the long-distance railways as well. Very good. So Yuri, are you going to do this one? I think the goal of this is, we've been at this now for 2 days, and our 4 panelists here have been in the thick of it and have been, God bless them, documenting some of these thoughts too. Finally, what did we learn? What have we learned here about the adaptive city, the responsive city, the personalized city, and quality of life? You have 15 minutes.
Start over there.
So, the personalised city that we were looking at. I didn't make much progress documenting actually. I think some of the others have done, but I've got loads of the thoughts from that session here and from our workshops. But there seem a lot of good examples of how the personal experience of the city is enhanced, being applied, technology is being applied for, and we've been working towards putting that into some sort of archetype, some sort of structure of whether that's passive or active participation, whether that's a more of a pragmatic approach, looking at the trade-offs around security that you may have to acknowledge, and perhaps some that I started using the anarchic city, but I think that something that some way that you as an individual are helping to be constructive in finding new approaches, and that touches onto sort of those recreating open source approaches to perhaps mapping or finding a new way to apply data. So the intention of what we had a number of examples of each of those, and going to write those up, and and there's not some of the points here about some of the characteristics that I touched on, that you did as well, about of some of these cities that have been approaching this, some from Barcelona to Charleston to in the US, Portland to name as a case in point, and places like Austin are and what citizen groups, what individual groups have been doing, programs of activity that are all good examples that came out in the session earlier today. But that's about as far as we've got. But some good discussions.
Indeed. Good. What we go next? Marjan or Dima?
Okay. So I'm representing the Adaptive Cities group, and Richard's not here, so the group can feel free to slap my hand if I start saying things that wasn't representative of the group. But here's what I think we kind of had the consensus on the definition some ourselves and some from Yuri's presentation today, that the adaptive city is going to be defined as a resilient, flexible, responsive city that has accounted for diversity and has situational awareness. But what are we really talking about when we say that a city demonstrates these characteristics? So as a part of our discussion yesterday, we had come to the conclusion that if we're talking of a disaster situation such as a 9/11 or a Katrina, the source of responsiveness and resilience is really coming from the people themselves, and not so much from the governance nor the physical infrastructure. So then if that is true, then what do we need to do to focus on defining the adaptive city? Do we need to create a governance structure that is adaptable? Or do we need infrastructure that is designed to deal with natural or man-made disasters? Do we need to be technocentric or people-centric? Or do we just remain people-centric and leverage technology to address the governance, political, social, and financial issues that we need to deal with to make our city adaptive? So, those kind of were not just part of the discussion, but perhaps lead us to thinking more about what we probably need to do in the future. Coming back to, what is the process of evolution of the adaptive city, and therein is the one element is the growth, the organic growth of the city and the evolution process. And then there's situations that are not just, they are not to be classified as disasters, but just the fact that a city center might be getting blighted, and in that situation, what is the intervention that could be required to do that? Perhaps bringing in some kind of an anchor development into that city center to prevent it from decay, or bringing in some regulations that allow for brownfield development as opposed to greenfields in the suburbs. Or of course, as we talked about disasters, then that's another a whole different situation where it starts with people, and maybe in the long term it is more of a top-down type government intervention. The people-centered view of the adaptive city was one where we felt that it really intersects with the personalized city, which was one that adapts to the needs of various citizens. Mentioned that city that was taking care of the disabled, the aging, the cyclists, and people with young families. It supports diversity. And so it's personalized in that sense. And that view of the adaptive city is kind of very much one that goes closely in hand with the personalized city. Also one that needs to recognize that what might be the benefit to one group within an urban area or a city may actually affect the others adversely. So that's kind of one of the elements. And as we talked about the people, the infrastructure, and governance, I'll just touch upon where we were on the physical infrastructure. We thought about adaptiveness as being something where we could maximize options and build backup solutions to deal with situations like brownouts and congestions, have some real-time solutions driven by information on changing the flow of traffic or making vehicle lanes into bike lanes, reducing wastefulness and optimizing construction using better asset management, kind of like Yuri just talked about in detail with all this predictive modeling and the asset management tools that we have today. Different matter altogether. That's another area that I guess we need to talk about a little bit more, where it's nice to have all of those layers of infrastructure and your ability to predict which one needs management, but to get a state agency jurisdiction to work with the city management, as would be the case with the highway bridge, as opposed to the water department under a city, would be another matter that we would probably now then have to deal that aspect of the physical infrastructure through governance, which then is the other element. Again, here we need to recognize that every institutional and political structure is based on various lobbies that help to elect them. So not necessarily representing the very greater good of all. But beyond that recognition of the political leadership needs to provide the inspiration and leadership to develop the vision for adaptive city. That under governance, I guess our discussion also showed that there is a need for means and methods of engaging stakeholders and citizens to actively and passively engage and influence. Personalization could be supported by an organic growth along with a combination of strong governance. Lots of examples were discussed today on various mayors across the world that provided that inspirational leadership for engaging public opinion. And then finally, I guess we discussed the hierarchy of objectives, the social, the health, the economic resilience linked to the vision for being adaptive. And then finally, something that's much closer to my heart is the financing options for infrastructure, learning from the failures of the private-public partnership and trying to figure out how we're going to actually do all these things.
Excellent.
Thank
Well,
you.
Summarized a great deal of material there. Marjan, I think you would naturally come
I'll
in.
just try to rely on my memory and just, I suppose, put 2 or 3 key points which came out of our theme, which was the supportive city. And the first one was that we need strong models of engagement between the city and its communities, and those models don't exist, and the models are not necessarily either IT-based or real-based, but it's a mixture of tools and methods, and there's almost a need for a new discipline of understanding different modes of engagements and using the right tools for the right problems. That was one angle of the other. The second angle was that there are areas where people don't want to engage. In fact, in many areas, people either don't have time to engage or don't have the knowledge base to engage. One of the areas is, for example, detailed energy management. And in those areas, we could have more adaptive systems which would learn the patterns of behaviors of the users and then take control and manage those. And these would be for example, energy, for example, with assisted living, production of more intelligent building components and appliance components at homes, etc. The third key issue was that the current governance and drivers of the cities does not respond to these needs as yet. And therefore there is no clear role or responsibility for anybody who would drive this kind of agenda of engagement forward. And finally, there was the point about right balancing between the use of technology and also the real world, that the technology can compete with the real world in terms of time, and there needs to be a harmony in terms of people's lifestyles. And it's got to be people-centric rather than person-centric. So there is the person, but there is the immediate community around them, and there needs to be a harmony.
Rick.
Yeah. So we addressed the topic, I've tried to express it as, can urban data improve quality of life? I think you can include a lot within that. A couple of examples to make us think we might be able to. One, I remember Colin copied me on an email from a long time ago with the subject of open data saves lives. And I thought, well, that's got to be worth reading. If you combine the fact that lots of places have open data about where defibrillators in public are posted, if you get that information through smartphone apps to first aiders with some knowledge of where someone has a problem that needs some help with, then you can get assistance to them a little bit quicker, and that makes a difference to their chances of recovery. So there are operational scenarios in which it seems like data can affect quality of life. And strategically, some work done at CASA, just down the road at UCL, is plotting life expectancy against area within cities such as London. Most cities in the UK, life expectancy varies by 10 or 20 years or even more between areas within the same city. That's an astonishing difference, and it's an indicator of many, many other aspects of cities at a more strategic level. So they seem to pretty inarguable instances that merit further discovery to see whether it's more generally the case. So we then looked at, well, what might quality of life mean, and we eventually, cut a long story short, started using Maslow's hierarchy of needs to interpret the different things that might influence quality of life. We were aware, though, when looking at Maslow's hierarchy of need, that perception of those different elements of it might be very, very, very much for a lot of different reasons. It might vary culturally. It's going to vary depending on how old you are, your family context, your social standing, your wealth. All sorts of different factors influence an individual's relationship with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But nevertheless, let's roll with that and see where it gets us. Two other factors that seemed to be important generally were stress and adaptability. So if city systems take stress out of people's lives, you'll have a better quality of life. So some of the examples Yuri gave of using using data to make transport serve people's lives better will take stress out. For adaptability, I think Seema's spoken a lot there, but the less stress is involved in individuals adapting to changes in cities, then perhaps the better quality of life they have. So with those backgrounds, we then started working through the example of a district of 100,000 people within a larger city with economic and demographic and housing and physical characteristics. We explored that context intellectually using Maslow's hierarchy of needs and ask, in that context, is data available that tells us about the different elements within the hierarchy in a way that seems valuable? And across systems such as food, sewage, water, the economy, etc., we found lots of examples that seemed to indicate that that was true. So this to us was, I think, as you stated this morning, actually that's a remarkable finding, that we could take a model of individual consciousness, apply it within an urban domain, a massively collective setting, and come up with instances of where data could add value to it. It clearly needs expanding along all the dimensions of variability that I described earlier, so we've really just put a drop in the ocean to get this started. But it does seem worth continuing. There are some challenges. So what about the things you can't measure? You can't measure the cash economy very well, for example, and that has huge effect on the quality of life for very many people. And then there's a need to balance between creating value from the data that's available versus making sure that we're focusing on the things that are most important. Those two things aren't necessarily the same. There are also perhaps lots of pieces of existing work that we could go and look at to draw on the Livable Cities project, Scribe, and other things. And final challenge would be something Volker, I think, referred to, which is this difference of perception of data between soft disciplines, social science, town planning perhaps, and hard disciplines, science and engineering. Someone gave an example of automotive manufacture, though, where those things are being reconciled already. So the Jaguar XF car, the emotional response of drivers to that car was engineered by Warwick University using simulations and measuring physiological response. So it sounds inside the car to the driver the way Jaguar wanted to elicit the maximum emotional response. So there you go. Cities are more complicated than that, but perhaps that gives us hope. So next steps, then plenty of work we could do, probably to start with looking at what existing research is already addressing the same area. But the next step we felt might be useful would be looking within a context such as the one we've already started exploring, who's taking decisions in that context and how could data help them take better informed decisions, whether that's city leaders, business people, parents, hostel residents, commuters, whatever the roles within cities. So that's where we got to.
Wonderful. Let's have a round of applause for our facilitators. They had a really tough job. First of all, herding cats, but secondly, herding ideas, because I think we very quickly found yesterday that this is an immensely broad area, and it's very hard to keep a focus and get further progress down that line. So I thank them all very, very much for that. So we're coming to that magic moment when the wonderful context that we built up over the last 2 days is going to somewhat evaporate, which is always tragic. So what does come next? Well, Stan, who manages the USC's webinar series, has suggested for the webinar on Friday, which will be at 5:30 UK time, more or less every week. I think we missed one last week. we have this webinar. You can find them on our website, and if you sign up on the distribution list, you'll get the notifications about them. Though we use that session to continue some of this debate, particularly on what we should do next. I will put in very quickly maybe just a placeholder blog, and then encourage you to post comments to it. It's very easy on the on the blog site. You just click on the comment, and you get the opportunity to submit comments, and I promise to try and approve them as fast as I can. There's one thought there to continue the debate again, and what we should then do next with this. We'll also post as many of the presentations as we can get hold of, and as much of the notes from the various sessions that we can get hold of. So we try and preserve some of that context in that kind of way as well. Richard and I were talking. I already had the intent to try and sort of write up a paper of some kind on this debate here, because I think it's been a fabulous couple of days. Richard actually found a good purpose for that, and I think what we could end up producing there is a sort of position paper on people-centric smart cities, if I can fit it into 4 words, that may well be publishable in a journal, but could certainly shape some motion that's going on at the European Commission at the moment about a body that will be in a position to fund smarter city projects, academic and I think also municipal projects. And it will be a good vehicle for shaping their thinking about this very important set of topics that we've been debating here. So I'm very pleased. It was Yuri and Stan and others know it was a long haul. Richard Folsham has been with us all the way to make it happen here, and we have John Pollock to thank in particular for letting us use the fabulous facilities, and also for his great commentaries